right. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so we'll go ahead and get started. This will be recorded so that anyone that misses the beginning can come back on and check it out. So welcome, everyone. My name is Beth Roberts. I'm one of the members of the Disruptor League team. We've got Brown Rig with us as well, who'll be helping me out with some co-hosting duties, also a member of our team. And we are thrilled today to have Steve Paladino with us to talk about, oh, look his face, he's like, oh no, pressure. To talk about, can lean and design play nicely together? So a little bit about Steve. Steve is the Global Director of Innovation and Continuous Improvement for Baltimore Air Coil Company, the global leader of factory assembled evaporative heat rejection and thermal storage equipment, which sounds really cool when I know nothing about. In this role, he's leading the company's global effort to harness the collective genius of its team and accelerate the improvement of its products, process, and customer experiences. So Steve clearly has a lot of experience in this area, and I'm super excited to hear what he has to share with us today about lean and design. So Steve, take it away.
All right, good. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I'm going to share my screen here real fast. So, I wanted this is a puzzling question for me, so much so puzzling that it became my job at BAC, and that's, how does continuous improvement and innovation coexist in an organization? So, I mean, can they live in harmony? There's a lot of organizations that have decided that these two things need to operate exclusively from each other. That you need to have a continuous improvement department, you need to have an innovation department, and never should the two meet or cross. But I would contend that in actuality and in reality, not only can they live in harmony, but they must. They have to, in an organization, for the organization to thrive and grow and really delight its customers. So as we go along, there's no rules here at the Disruptor League. You're all disruptors, so feel free to disrupt my presentation and ask me questions whenever you want. It's meant to be an interactive session. I know we do enough PowerPoints every day as it is. So. So Steve, who am I? Who is this guy in the glasses? I don't have them on today, so that's a good sign. I'm seeing well. I'm not a professor. I don't profess to be a world-renowned expert in anything. What I am is I'm a practitioner. I'm a facilitator. I'm a doer with dirt under my fingernails, and that's the space I like to be in. And I choose to be in. So I started my post-college career. I got a degree in mechanical engineering and went into the Corps of Engineers, which I found out had nothing to do with engineering, unless you think explosives are somehow engineering. But learned leadership, learned servant leadership, especially for those who are unaware. In the Army, the officers eat last. So if nothing else, that'll keep your waistline trim. And then at some point decided to exit and went into the world of tier one automotive supply, worked for a couple of great companies there in operations, engineering, and continuous improvement. So kind of the whole gamut of the value chain. And it's a torturous life. It's a low margin world. It's a high pressure world. I did a lot of just-in-time supply. So I learned how to solve problems quickly there, and learned really the importance of lean manufacturing to drive value for organizations. And then, at some point in every automotive supplier's career, you decide, I've got to get out of this. And there's a couple of ways you can exit. I left on one of the more desirable ways, which was by choice, not by any other means. And but I was looking for an opportunity to take kind of the practice of continuous improvement and lean into a non-automotive environment. And I came across Baltimore Air Coil Company, was looking for it. And somewhere right after I joined, I got into this whole space called innovation and design, and went to a 1-week course taught by Notre Dame on called Innovation Action Bootcamp. So, and there they were going to, teach us how to be innovators. Well, it struck me, and it struck me in a stunning way, and it kind of brings us full circle to why I'm talking to you today, because I started to think, wow, in all the lean stuff I have, these tools that exist in this design universe, they belong as part of this tool set, and vice versa. So I'm going to explain about how that works. I'm a lifelong student. I love to learn. I say lean of Scrum. I think it's about combining the tools in the environment, not trying to use one tool. So if there's purists in the crowd that say Agile can fix everything, Lean Six Sigma can fix everything, or Lean can fix everything, I disagree. And that's just my opinion. I think that if you can become a well-versed practitioner in many of these things, when you're faced with challenges in your business, you can apply them and make a huge difference. So, any questions on Steve Who? You probably know more about me than you wanted to, but I wanted to give you some context on how I came to some of these conclusions that I'm going to share. So, no questions? Okay, cool. So, continuous improvement, and now we're talking about in the classic sense. So, this is kind of your lean Toyota production system thought process. It takes what's going on in your organization, your existing elements, and provides you opportunities through the tool set to identify and get rid of waste, um, and reduce defects, improve your quality of your products and services. But it's really focused on improving incrementally what's in front of you. And the key word, and if you pick up any bit of lean doctrine, is always waste. The 7 types of waste. And that's really for me where the focus is. It's going and looking at your existing process, your current state, identifying the waste, and then creating some future state based on that. Innovation to me is based on this whole idea of the unmet need. What's the unmet need? Trying to discern and understand what the unmet need is, and then resolving that unmet need through some structured or even unstructured creative process. So when we start talking about design, that's a very structured, creative problem-solving process. But it always starts with this need and trying to understand and internalize this unmet need. So to me, there's a pretty good contrast, even if you look on the surface, just in pure definition of these two classically. And it drives you into some type of matrix that looks like this, that says, hey, the horizon of continuous improvement is very operational. It's very tactical. It's short term. When you make your business plan, you set some targets for that year, and you use a lot of continuous improvement tools to get to them in the classic world. Innovation, you tend to think more strategic. In 5 years, we'd like to develop this, or we've identified this need and we have this long path. It involves the R&D department. It's elaborate. I think continuous improvement is very metric focused. So we want to take this result from 5% to 2% if it's a scrap rate. We want to improve the efficiency of this machine from 80% to 90%. You start with a value stream map, you put all sorts of metrics along it, and then you identify Kaizens to improve. Where I think innovation, the focus is very human-centric. It's what's this unmet need in the market? What's this unmet need in the population? And how are we going to tackle it? I said before, the target of the two, one is waste, one is unmet needs. And finally, I think the impact, if you think in a classic sense, what's the impact of continuous improvement? It's incremental. You don't see huge step changes usually using the tools that a typical lean practitioner uses. However, in innovation, you're looking for a big step change. You're looking to disrupt the market, to turn it upside down, to shatter orthodoxies, and to move into a different space. So I think if you look at classic definitions, and this matrix, you get a feel for kind of where the ground is. It has been set in the past, and I'm going to explain to you now how I see that ground shifting. So, any other comments on the difference, at least in the past, between these two? Any questions? You can send them by chat too if you don't want to talk. Brownrig will just keep an eyeball on the chat and let me know that there's something out there. So.
Oh, you've got one, Steve.
Oh, really? What you got? When it's a fish? Go
Yep,
ahead.
Yes.
Donna.
Uh, Let me see. Let me
So
open the
yeah.
chat.
Do
Chat.
orthodoxies ever show up in continuous improvement?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a minute. They show up all the time, and it's really this really beautiful experience because if anyone's looked at kind of the writings of Jim Womack, who's just, I mean, he's the one who created the Toyota production system in the U.S. He's kind of the father of lean. He's a wonderful improver and lean practitioner. And he always says these things: when you go to the shop floor, go see, ask why, and show respect. But usually what people say is, why is this happening to an operator? And when you go two layers deeper than why is it happening, you start to uncover empathy, ethnography, and ultimately orthodoxies in the organization. So I'll talk a little about that in a second and how we've used it and how I see that can play a role. But they definitely exist, and we're using them in that continuous improvement space. So if you look at this graph, pretty simple graph, not based on any statistical notion. This is really how I feel about what goes on. If you look at the value creation in terms of dollars on the left axis, what's the potential value creation of an activity or an idea? And on the bottom, you look at what's the novelty, how new is it, how fresh, how groundbreaking, and how much effort. Usually continuous improvement lives in that low novelty, lower effort, lower value creation space. Um, and there's exceptions, but normally I would say that's how we think of it. And then if you think of high novelty, high effort research and development, you're talking about big value creation, entering new markets, listing new products, and new adventures. But if you think of the two of the things, there's this overlap. There's this overlap of things that are like, well, that's going to take a little more effort. So is that really innovation, or is that continuous improvement? Or boy, that could create a lot of value. Is that innovation, or is that continuous improvement? And trust me, organizations go into board meetings, they go into staff meetings, they go into C-level meetings, they go into department meetings, and they argue over that overlap. And they will say, hey, that's innovation. And some will say that's not innovation, that's just continuous improvement. And so this turf war starts to begin. So a guy on the shop floor comes up with an idea to do something drastically different. Well, we say, hey, you're a continuous improvement guy. You find a different socket. You can't tell us how to eliminate the socket or the bolt with glue. We don't care about that. That belongs in the innovation team. So you're the continuous improvement guy. And no more so the innovation guys, they say, well, that's just a small gain. Why would we be interested in that at all? Even though it's a huge pain point for a human that exists on the factory floor. So you end up with this overlap. And my contention is, and what do you call the overlap between the two? Anyone want to guess? What do you call that overlap where these two areas bump into each other? It doesn't matter what you call it. It matters not at all. And I think organizations that spend time trying to define that overlap, trying to separate those two spaces from each other, they're wasting time, because in the end, all we're trying to do is go from a current state of our business, of our production, of, of our business process to a future state. So along this road, we're going to have these projects that we can call continuous improvement or innovation, but they're just going to take us from where we are now to where we want to go, from our current state to our future state. And our future state may be entering new markets, it may be introducing new product, it may be revolutionizing something. But people get hung up on this, and they really get hung up on the notion that we have to call it something. And I was talking to a colleague this morning about this whole notion of, is it innovation or not? If it's new to you, I call it innovation. Why not? Everyone gets wrapped around the axle on, hey, well, wow, wasn't Uber innovative? I say, well, if you use your term of innovation, I would say no. If you use mine, yes, because the idea of picking up a stranger and taking him somewhere has been around forever. It's called hitchhiking. So all they did was take that idea and put an app on top of it. So it was really incremental because the idea already existed. But I call it innovation. So you could just call it continuous improvement. Um, and so that's this whole idea of they can live together and don't spend a lot of calories and brain power trying to name them. And the thing about the overlap between these two things is it's growing. And I have this vision that one day it just merges and it just becomes this big thing that we call, innovation. Um, but if you think about tools, and I'm a tool guy, my basement's full of tools that I don't use. If I have to do something once, I buy a tool for it. Well, if you look at the tools in innovation and continuous improvement, um, what we're seeing, and in my experience, is they're starting to converge into each other. And I'll give you some examples. If you start with what is the classic lean manufacturing tool is to map your process, and they call that VSM, value stream mapping. Um, if you take that tool, um, and when you each one of these processes you define in a VSM with a process box, they call it, and it's loaded with nice little metric data. Um, but if while you're doing that, you do some ethnography, you gain some empathy for the people that you're studying. And instead of just asking them, what do you do? And why do you do it that way? Ask them how they feel when they're doing it. Oh, a lean practitioner will say, whoa, well, why do I want to get into that? But an innovator says, well, that's all I care about. I want to know, I want to get some empathy data off of this guy in this process. And how does he feel about the organization? And too often, a lean engineer will just take his stopwatch, say, took him 3 minutes, or go over and say, why do you do it that way? The guy says, I was trained to do it that way. Oh, okay. And they walk away. So you can see the convergence. Empathy mapping inside of value stream mapping. Somebody mentioned orthodoxies. We're doing a Kaizen event. Um, and you look at something and say, why do you do it that way? And the answers, we always do it that way. You say, whoa, okay, well, wait a second. If you always do it that way, that's taking me somewhere towards an orthodoxy. And you start to dig. Why do you do it that way? And I'll give you a quick example of that in real life. We were doing a Kaizen event on safety in the assembly of our cooling towers. And I had a group assembled and they were doing great stuff, time studies, had done some 5S work. And we got around this idea of safety. And we're talking about fall restraints. And the gent said, I said, you always use your fall restraint. And okay, there was a pause there. So I said, okay, he doesn't use it. Let me find out why. And I said, do you always use your fall restraint? Well, I do, unless it's the last 30 minutes of the shift. I said, whoa, why would you not use it the last 30 minutes of the shift? It's just as dangerous to fall off in the first 30 as the last 30. And he said, because, the last 30 minutes, we got to get things done and leave on time. Now, nowhere do we have a written law in the BAC handbook that says these safety rules apply, except for the last 30 minutes where you have to get things done because you need to leave on time. No, but that's an orthodoxy in the organization. And immediately as a designer, I recognized that and started to dig into that a lot more. Instead of just saying, you need to make sure you wear them. I wanted to understand why and dug into that orthodoxy on why. So, this whole idea of ethnography and understanding people, analogs, analogs are a typical design tool. Go look at how somebody else did it that's been successful outside of your space. We're starting to use them more and more as we do continuous improvement. Doing things like affinity diagrams, gathering the team together instead of, saying the engineers are going to do this process improvement, turn the thing 180 degrees and say, how should we do it? And so and the same applies when we're doing discovery and innovation projects, when we're trying to understand matter. Right? We do value stream mapping. first time I did value stream mapping with our R&D guys, they were like, "Oh, that's an awesome tool. Boy, that was really helpful to teach us something." I was like, "Well, there you go. The convergence of those two spaces coming together." I see a bunch of pings up here. Am I missing some questions? Something I should
No,
No,
you
you're
answered
good. We're
one.
just yeah.
okay, good enough. So,
Steve, I have a
so
question.
go ahead, man.
I'm gonna take you back a little bit.
All right. Yeah, because I
What
was
do you
talking like a machine gun there for a minute. Sorry about that.
That's all right. What why do you think this turf war, right? You talk about it as a turf war between innovation and continuous improvement and these different teams. And it almost feels like it's this weird, it's probably this weird tension of well, that's not my job or that's their job.
Sure.
Versus a line I feel like I can't cross. And I'm wondering what you think the root of that is.
I think there's a lot there. I think there's some orthodoxies in organizations that think that continuous improvement is grunt work. I've been in organizations that feel that okay, that's grunt work. So they think there's a different skill set needed in each of these spaces. So I think that drives a lot of the division. I think structurally, organizationally, often they're far apart from each other. Maybe the innovation group is in the headquarters and the continuous improvement group is living in the factory. I've seen that in organizations. So I think there's, and then there's this whole idea that my tool set is the best tool set to solve this problem. So if you would, Agilists will tell you, hey, we can do everything with Agile. And look what happened with Six Sigma as an example. It was a solution to everything. Everything had this cool analysis of variance to it, and if we reduce the variance, then everything would be hunky dory. And we've came to find out that, hey, it doesn't work in this and it doesn't work in that, but there are things that it works for. So I do think there's some pride in, this is my level of expertise. This is what I know how to do. And I don't want your stuff in my sandbox. Please keep it over in your continuous improvement area, and we'll do the innovation thing. And I think sometimes organizations manifest that with their actions and behaviors. So.
Yeah, it definitely can be. That environment can be certainly reinforced by culture and leadership and how that is taught and encouraged.
Sure.
And then Donna brings up an interesting perspective about innovation. There's this orthodoxy that innovation is creatives only, right? And so if you look at Six Sigma, and you and I have talked about Six Sigma before. I worked in an organization that after some leadership changes, it was described as a cancer to the organization, because it was used as kind of like a weapon almost. And so Six Sigma is, continuous improvement is for the math and the numbers people, and innovation is for the creatives. And that environment can continue to be reinforced. And Donna, right, like, and it's what it means to be creative isn't well defined or understood. And Donna and I have had, we've been having some of this discussion about, creativity shows up in different ways.
Sure. And I think when you look at kind of what organizations do, some of them, there's a license to be creative. It's like, well, I work as a researcher, or I work as a designer. So I have that license, and you don't have that license because your position doesn't allow you to be creative. We had a summit at BAC, and the focus intentionally was everyday innovation. These incremental improvements that are being made all over the company around small things, and my favorite story is I was in Belgium and I was on the shop floor and I saw this tool I had never seen before, printed in bright green plastic. And I was like, what is that? I've never seen one. I walk these floors all the time. What is it? So I walked over and I picked it up, and a gentleman approached me right away and said, can I help you? And I said, yeah, what is this? He goes, well, you know how we cover bolts with caulk? You know how we have to do it like a baker now? We go around in a circle and come out. I 3D printed an adapter for the end of a caulking gun that I can stick over the bolt and just squeeze the trigger and it covers the bolt with caulk. I said, "You, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, I measured all the bolts we have, and I have a 3D printer at home." Now, this is a guy who assembles cooling towers, um, and I said, "Give me that thing. Give me the design. Give me everything. We're going to make them for everybody." So he had, he didn't have the license to solve the problem. He had the need. And he saw it as continuous improvement. And to me, that's everyday innovation. And that's why I say I see these bubbles kind of falling over the top of each other,
Mhm.
and starting to merge together and blurring a lot.
Yeah, and then Steve, I don't. Oh, go ahead. Somebody was chiming in. Go for it.
Yeah, if I may, Beth, sorry. If you could elaborate a little bit more, because yeah, I like your take on one is more human centric, the other one kind of
Yeah.
lean and but they need each other. You're right, and
Yeah.
to create this culture of innovation, because mindset comes well with design, but
Right.
design, I'm not sure how it deals with market segmentation, sort of down
Yeah.
or channels or business,
Sure.
and that's whereas lean could help you in that aspect and
Sure.
build a prototype and then test it rather than just an MVP. Why wait till a learning launch, which could be pretty expensive,
Sure.
rather than going the lean way? So I think if you combine them in the right areas, the empathy part already in the customer discovery, etc.
Sure.
So I don't know what your take.
No, I mean, I think you're spot on, Paul. And kind of my expectations box on this slide, it kind of takes us down there. Well, I think the expectations, and we're a manufacturer, so we're not selling a service, we're selling a product. So I'm speaking in that context. But I think the expectation of the organization is changing. And I think everyone who says it, this whole virtual experience has changed it, in a step change. That we're starting to see more empowerment in our teams and our employees. Um, you know, Failure is becoming more acceptable. I think part of it is because we're doing it more because we can't touch things in the same way. Things like autonomy. You know, we didn't discipline this gent in Belgium for making his solution. We congratulated him. We had another engineer that I bumped into in South Africa just because they left me alone in a factory. Bad idea. I was visiting the factory and they just said, "We have to go to a meeting. Could you stay here?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'll stay right here, sitting here while you're gone." As soon as they left, I took off. And I introduced myself to an engineer, said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm glad you asked." I was like, "Okay." And he's like, "Well, I taught myself parametric modeling. I've been coming in on the weekends. Um, and I've reduced the time to take something from customer request to submittal drawings from 5 days to 3 hours." So we celebrated that guy. We flew him to the U.S. to speak at our innovation summit. So I think how do you bridge through that is you start to encourage it. You start to decentralize some of this stuff. I have this metaphor in my head that's bouncing around all the time about the organizations like the water on the upstream side of a dam. It has all this collective genius and potential. And what's standing in the middle is the management. Holding that back and not letting it flow downstream, and let it flow as innovation, let it flow as continuous improvement, but get it flowing, because downstream is your customers and your C-suite, and all they're seeing is a trickle of water in some organizations. And what's holding this up is the management who's come up with these stupid rules of you can't call that continuous improvement, you need to call that innovation. So we need to unlock that potential all the time, and let that water flow downstream. So it makes sense.
Yeah, so tailoring it is the key.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And looking for opportunities to do it. Find a chance. Find an opportunity to do it. Find the opportunity to take an operator to a customer site and get direct feedback on his work. I mean, who's ethnography is not just for ethnographers. you know You can take an operator to see the customer. The customer can give his feedback directly to the operator. I mean, wow, that's cool. But kind of unheard of until you start to let those two spheres come together and you start to mesh tools. So two things I think are overlapping and growing: tools and expectations. I just think the modern workforce, the level of candor that we have to be willing to accept as managers. And I really believe in my metaphor that dam is the middle layer of management. And if I school my teams on anything, it's that you're obstructing. You have to take candid feedback from your customer. Just because you built it doesn't mean they love it, right? So all this stuff is coming together and it's driving this level of improvement. So how do you create harmony? It's my last slide, and then we can chat a little bit more. But you have to increase the overlap in this process, and you have to do it with process. Have a structured innovation process. We have one at BAC. It's a 5-step process. We move things through it either in one day or 1 year, but we follow a process. And we start to mix these things together in the overlap. We start to pull lean tools into our design process, our innovation process. We start to pull innovation tools into our lean processes, but do it with process. When you have a workshop going on one, bring some of the other in, and kill the turf war. If you have it going on in an organization, just kill it. I love my title, Director, Innovation and Continuous Improvement. It's very easy because if there's a turf war, it's me fighting with myself. So I need to just sit and look in the mirror and resolve it to get going. So the next thing is create more Swiss Army knives. We're starting to do this more and more. I'm starting to train my lean practitioners in design. I'm starting to train my design practitioners in lean, because the more I do that, the better they become, and they move at a really exponential rate of growth when they start to see other things. It's the epiphany that I had when I went to Notre Dame 5 years ago for my design class. Is I was like, whoa, wait a second, there's something here that I can borrow. And it works both ways. So create those Swiss Army knives. Find those practitioners in your organizations, or even yourself. If you're not familiar with one thing, take a course on it, and be a constant learner. And the final thing, and I used a couple of examples. I talked about the guy with the caulking gun. I talked about the parametric modeler. But you have to celebrate this stuff and make it visible in your organization. That first, you've killed the turf war, and we're going to celebrate the guy who created the 3D printed caulk nozzle as an innovator. We're going to give him that degree and show it in front of everybody, just like we're gonna celebrate someone from the corporate headquarters that has a continuous improvement idea for the factory, how to design a better push cart for the factory. Seems trivial, but it can fix their pain points as well. So I think those 4 things for me, that's the things I'm doing. And that I work on every day, is to try to move these things closer together, and really don't get hung up on what to call it, because they have to live together for the company to be successful. And that's my spiel in 35 minutes. So I'd love to have a discussion or answer any questions, or just throw it around the table a bit.
Yeah, so if you have questions or comments for the group or for Steve, feel free to come off mute and join in, or enter it in the chat if you're shy, or we'd love to hear from you.
Hey,
I think Steve,
Bronwyn can ask questions too.
He can.
Wow, flattered.
Go ahead, Beth. You had a question.
No. I was just going to say, I think it's so. I love the term, that you talk about here, create more Swiss Army knives, and it's something that I think is so important as this becomes, or as we try to make it blurrier, right? That line, which is the more tools you can have in your toolbox, the better off you are in any role, right? No matter what team you're on, what your job is. Having those tools in your toolbox just makes it so that when a problem arises, or an issue or something arises, It's about applying the right tool. Because if you only have one tool, you apply it, right? If you only have a hammer, everything's a nail, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So if you've got a larger set of tools in your toolbox, then you can really think about what's the right way to go about, to approach this when something does pop up. And that
and the other
it
side of
equips
that,
people. Yeah.
And the other side of that, if you're always a nail, you're always looking for a hammer too.
Yes.
That's the backhand side of it, is already having a solution for a problem you haven't defined. Is the same thing. So yeah,
that's my favorite. That's the worst one. We used to do these events at an organization I worked in, and we do these design events, right? And you go through and you do testing, and you have this hypothesis, and you say, okay, well, here's our threshold, and if we meet this criteria, right, this is our threshold to either pivot or persevere. And these groups would present their ideas, and then they'd go, well, we didn't meet our threshold, but we still think it's a good idea, so we're going to keep going. And it's like, well, then why did you have your criteria? And it's
right.
A bobcat just jumped into my backyard. Sorry, my husband just sent me a text. Welcome to the desert.
Go. There you
welcome
go.
to the desert.
There you go. Sorry. Unexpected things will happen. So
that was random. So the dog will not be going out anytime soon. But yeah, in their minds, they were like, well, no, we still think this is a good idea, so we're gonna do another experiment. And it's like, but your solution didn't work for your customers, so why are you going to keep going? And they had fallen in love with their solution, right? We talk a lot around here around fall in love with the problem, so that you know what the right problem is that you're trying to solve. If you've fallen in love with your solution, none of your tools are going to work, because you're not going to listen to what they're telling you.
Yeah, and really, when we do, and this is probably one of the biggest things that's come out of design and gone into our lean activities in our factories, is this whole idea of framing the problem. Now, you do it, lean teaches it, that if you're doing an 8D, that you start in that space, what problem. But I think, the design approach to defining your problem is so much stronger. And so we're taking a lot of our design tools, we call them canvases, we're bringing them into the lean area. And I love to hear the change in the lexicon of our teams when they start to say, what problem are you trying to solve, and why is that important, and who's it a problem for? And if you don't solve it, what's going to happen? And if you do solve it, what could happen? And can we restate it? Can we make it a how might we? When you start to hear that in your continuous improvement teams, that this kind of convergence of these tool sets is happening. And in terms of tools, we added one recently because we saw the back end of our innovation process was kind of waning in energy. It's what we call elaborate and launch. So I think every design process has something in the back end. And so we brought in Agile, Scrum, for the back end of our process. And that's how we're driving things across the finish line, because it's highly engaging for the team. It's all about accountability and empowerment. So we introduce another tool to make. So now it's like we start with lean, we go to Agile, we come back to design, and our teams are getting more and more conversant on those terms, that they're doing all those things, and they're seeing the benefits, and they're starting to learn, oh, that's a screw, I need a screwdriver. Oh, that's a hammer or a nail, I need a hammer. And that's what we want. That's what we're really looking for.
What other questions are there, or thoughts, ideas, agree, disagree?
Well, I think that if I may, I don't know if Bronwyn wanted to speak here.
No, go ahead, Paul. You're good.
Okay. Yeah, because your example was very interesting. Yes, with design, preserving or pivoting, and that's why the more tools you have in your toolbox are so important, because I think lean would have brought them faster to place to know whether to preserve or pivot than design. So I think using them together, there's more efficiency coming out of the process. Of course, innovation probably has less efficiency, but adding continuous improvement to it would speed up the process.
Well, yeah, and Agile is something. Go ahead, Steve.
I think a lot of, I think you come to some richer, using some of the design tools, we've come up with richer solutions than we would have with just our lean tools, in things like material movement. You know, teams. We have a team that's working on moving sheet metal. We've been moving sheet metal for 70 years at BAC. So you bring together the experts. They go, oh, okay, well, let's try this conveyor. Let's try this cart, right? Or you say, who else moves metal in the universe? You know, and you start to, go out and do some discovery and collect some analogs, and you start to ask questions. Why do we move it at all? Why does the machine come to the metal? Just to be controversial. And people start to think in totally different spaces in their head, and the engagement level goes up, up, up. That's why I love, I mean, I would never take another job because, if I couldn't get my hands on facilitating, I'd go crazy, because it's getting more and more fun for a facilitator, because I look and I don't have just a screwdriver and a hammer anymore. I open the bag and I'm like, whoa, there's a multimeter, and there's an amp probe, and well, there's a whole bunch of other stuff in here. There's a flashlight, and just as a facilitator, it's that much richer. So Adam's going off to his daily scrum. Good for him. Brown Ray, you had a question,
yeah.
huh?
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on the answer just through the conversations that we've been having. It seems like there needs to be a process for us to figure out like how these different mentalities work in our specific organizations. Have you found, like, when the rubber meets the road, is there a process that you can follow, or is it just you're throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks and then?
No, I mean, we have a couple of drivers in our business. One is called our product roadmap. So that's really driving the inputs on the product side, and the other is an operating plan. So a lot of the inputs on what we need to do come from those things, and then we stop and say, how do we do them best? And we literally form cross-functional teams and try something. There's a little bit of spaghetti on the wall there, but I like spaghetti on the wall because you find kind of, well, I didn't know I could use that to do that. And sometimes you step back and you have a little retrospective or a little after action review with the team, and they go, that did not work. That was a load of bollocks, Paul, huh? But you have to be able to listen to it. You have to say, hey, okay, I get it. Be very retrospective and agile in that space. But give yourself credit for trying something different to see if you could get an even, a faster or a more robust outcome. So to answer your question, Brown Rig, yeah, we kind of triage stuff. We set things up on what needs to get done, but then we try to form teams and figure out how to do them. We often call them innovation teams. Just for lack of a better term, even in the factories, we don't necessarily call them continuous improvement teams anymore. We like to call them innovation teams. Everyone feels special when you call them innovation. I mean, it just feels good. I like to call them all disruptors. That make them feel even better. Like, hey, I'm a disruptor now. But then we form those teams, and then you start to sort through. And this is where you need to have good facilitation. You need to have some skilled Swiss Army knives standing in front of the room, because you don't want the team to squander or lose velocity. That's the starting point. That's how we kick it off. I would hate to guess. We the other thing, and I didn't talk about this and I intentionally left it out of the presentation because it's controversial always, is how do you track your improvement? I say quite simply, at the bank. How do you track yours?
Your account.
That's always my comeback. Because if we're not delighting the customer in a way that creates value, we can delight the customer. It's easy. You want to delight your customers, give them their product for free. They don't care then. They're like, oh, it didn't really work that well, but it didn't cost us anything either. But if you delight them in a way that creates value, then you measure your success with value. And if you improve your process to create value, you measure your success with value. So all these, everyone will tell you, oh, you need to have this metric, that metric, this metric, that metric. How many innovation teams do you have? What value are they creating? How many ideas have they come up with? I'm not in that space. And a purist will tell you you're an idiot, and you're a controversial fool. But really, I like to point things back to value. We're an employee-owned company, and nothing speaks to our employees more than value, because in the end, it comes to them.
Mm-hmm.
So there's my grenade pull for the day.
Yeah.
Not a gigantic fan of innovation metrics.
It's a little, those two things don't necessarily go together.
That seems like a whole other thought leader session on just
innovation metric. Please bring the guy who loves the metrics and put me on the other side, and we can do one of those
voice debate.
It'd be like The Voice. It'd be like The Voice will be going at each other. It's a bit tongue in cheek. You do have to have some metrics and some things down the road, but I think we get obsessed with it, and spending time and energy on recording and building those metrics is all energy that could have gone to creating value for your customer. So when someone says, I need to leave, or I need to break off this meaningful conversation we're having because I need to prepare my slides for tomorrow, it's part of me dies, to be honest. Because there wasn't value created in that. And when we start talking about continuous improvement and innovation, get focused on value. Because again, the journey from your current state to your future state needs to have more value, or else get off the road. Just park on the side.
Steve, I think that's why you need both of them, because if you look at your bank with one or the other, one isn't addressing market segmentation, and the other is. So the bank account may look better with market segmentation than one. So when you merge both, then the metrics start flowing easier, and the bank account looks better.
Right. So right. Well, and it may take some time. I understand, like when we build a new product, market acceptance, market penetration, competitor displacement, all those things take time. So you can't say, well, we launched this and we're going to wait, we're going to wait to see if it creates money. So there are some metrics in the intermediary. How many requests for quotes are we getting? These kind of things that we measure new product by and new innovation by. But in general terms, it should lead to your bank account, unless you're a nonprofit. If you're a not-for-profit, you have different things you're concerned about. But as I said in the beginning, I'm a practitioner and a profit manufacturer. And that's why we exist, to be honest, is to take our customers' money and put it in our bank as much as possible, and everything that interrupts that flow, we have to get rid of somehow, innovation or continuous improvement. So
that's awesome.
Anything Steve, else?
Yeah, one of the things I think of like a parting thought as we near the end of the session is, and you've touched on this a couple of times around leadership, right? And the culture that's created and the language that's used and getting out of the way.
Right.
So as a leader, how do you equip your teams, right? Or how do we equip our teams to do their best work, to use all these tools that we've introduced and continue to introduce tools to our teams, and then get out of the way and let them do the work that needs to be done in the way that they like. It's like, that's why you hire people, right? To do the work and to bring their thoughts and perspectives, and you're there to guide and remove barriers and help teach and facilitate. But so often it's the leaders that think they know best.
Oh, absolutely. You have a license to have ideas, and the rest of the team is supposed to follow them. If you go back to my metaphor with the dam and think of the whole organization as the upstream side, built up water, potential energy, the managers need to know that they're the dam, and there's nothing you can avoid. You have to tell them. You have to tell them they're obstructing progress. They're blocking ideas. They're not allowing their team to grow and share. You have to point it out. plain as day. I do it all the time. I don't call them a damn, you know, but I do try to put it in context that you're not allowing the collective genius of your team to translate into value for our customer. That's the way I tell it to them. And you know, it's a nice way to say you need to open some of these floodgates in this dam and let some of these ideas loose. And you need to create the psychological safety in your team. You know, whole different Brown Rig, another topic. Get Amy Edmondson for that. Don't call me for that one. I'm still trying to figure it all out. But you have to create an environment that allows them to share those ideas, and then you have to act on them when they're brilliant. You can't pound them to the ground. So what do you do with the mindset of your leadership? You tell them they're in the way. And you know, as a disruptor, take great pride in that. And find examples. You know, I loved when I took that nozzle, that bright green nozzle, and went to the plant manager and said, "Do you know what your assembler was doing on line 2 today?" And he rolled his eyes. "Oh, please don't tell me." I said, "It's the most brilliant thing I've seen in months." And he's like, "Well, I never knew." Well, there you go. Because he didn't think he could tell you. He just made his life easier and kept it to himself. So get your leaders in there. Tell them, hey, you know, break down the walls, you know, get ready to hear candor. It's tough for a lot of leaders. And I always say, you know, if you want to live in the 80s, then you're going to be left behind. And I think that vertical, you know, hierarchical management style is not conducive to innovation or continuous improvement.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Steve. We always appreciate hearing from you and hearing your perspective. And thank you to those of you that had questions. We are in a little bit of a pause. Steve is wrapping up this series of our Thought Leader sessions. We're working on scheduling some more out for maybe one in May and a couple in June. So that schedule will be out soon on our website and in our community on Mighty Networks. So we'll keep everyone posted on those. And thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.
Thank you, Steve.
Cheers.